Okay, that's what I thought. Now, I asked that question a couple days ago, and there were about 3 or 4 times as many people, and I think 5 people raised their hands. However, one of the highest impact processes we identified, and I will just touch on this, is competency management. You are going to have to do competency management now. You're going to have to take this seriously. It is one of the foundational processes in talent management is understanding what the competencies are that drive your company or your organization, and then using that information in all these other processes. John Havenar from Whirlpool, it was kind of a revelation to me, who's a very interesting guy. I talked to you about him earlier. He told me at Whirlpool there's a senior VP of corporate competencies who reports to the CEO. Whirlpool's a very big company. They own KitchenAid, they own Maytag, they're a global appliance manufacturer. I don't know how many thousands of employees they have, but they take this very, very seriously. And that to me was a sign that something's changing. 4 or 5 years ago when I asked companies about competency management, most of them didn't even want to talk about it. It was a topic, it was off limits. So there's some really big things that are changing. Now, globally, sort of as a theme, what's happening in HR is if you go back maybe 10, 15 years ago, the HR function was really all about payroll, transactions, making sure that we're legally compliant, handling the transactional issues with people. And then probably 8 to 10 years ago, books were written about a topic called strategic HR. And the idea of strategic HR was that HR managers need to be business partners. They need to go out and work with line managers and help them do recruiting and help them do training. And the concepts of organizational design and OD were born. And you can go to school and you can get a degree in OD, and then you can go into organizations and you can work in a business unit as an OD consultant or as an HR consultant, and you can help the business with its organizational issues. And that's really where HR has been for the last 10 years. And the software that companies have bought has been learning management systems, HR systems, portals, compensation systems, and so forth. And there's been a very big industry in that market. But that's not really enough anymore, because now we're looking at these organizational-wide issues. So I really believe, and I firmly believe this, that these organizations are going to be completely transformed, and that HR is going to look a lot different 4 or 5 years from now in terms of dealing with talent management. In talent management, you have to look at things like competencies. And the competency challenge, that's a tough problem. You can't do it in a business-by-business initiative. They're looking at performance management. Not only how can we implement a performance management system, and that's actually the easiest part, but what is the right process, and how do we get managers to behave correctly and communicate correctly, and how do we coach them, and how do we take people who aren't managers and turn them into managers and show them how to do this. And succession planning. Succession planning is now the biggest issue that we raised from the survey, and it's the most immature process of all. Most companies have succession planning for the CEO. Some companies don't even have that. They have it for 1 or 2 levels below the CEO, but most companies don't have it much below that. There are some companies, Caterpillar, for example, that has succession planning all the way down to the first-line managers. Everybody in the company has a succession plan. But that's rare. So these are things that are new. And what's going on now is basically what I call business integration. You're not just a business partner. You have to be integrated into the processes going on in your sales, product, manufacturing, support organizations. And you need to feel and see those business problems that I talked about earlier, in addition to integrating the HR function. So the software in the blue box that's now becoming popular are these are the areas, the biggest of which and the biggest buzz is this new thing called an integrated talent management system, which is what Learn.com is basically in the middle of launching and releasing in Learn Center X. And so what companies are trying to do to get their hands around all this is they're trying to figure out how to take their tapestry of software and integrate it together as well. So this is really what's going on in HR. In terms of how it actually manifests itself in organizations, if you look at all these talent management processes, what really we have to do is we have to stitch them together. Essentially what happens in talent management is what you find is that every one of these processes is somehow dependent on one or more of the others. And so a lot of the work that has to take place is not telling the sourcing and recruiting manager to do a better job of hiring, but actually maybe having him use the information from performance management to identify the characteristics of the high performers and using that information to screen people to get a better pool of candidates and maybe go look for people in places he didn't think they existed before. So essentially, just to give you some examples, you can go through this in your company, and this is all highlighted in our research, is you can go through and you can start to identify, okay, if we want to do a better job of sourcing and recruiting, we need to get some information from this process, we need to get some information from this process, we need to integrate onboarding and so forth. And that's really the crux of this term, integrated talent management. Now in our research, we're not going to use the word integrated because we think all talent management has to be integrated. And so there's no difference between unintegrated talent management and integrated talent management. It's really all the same thing. But you'll hear a lot about this integration as you read articles in the press and you talk to software vendors and you look at what Learn.com is going and so forth. And actually from the software vendor standpoint, the challenge for companies like Learn.com is figuring out what all these links are. Because they have to try to create software that supports all these various relationships. In the interest of trying to clarify what this is all about, we sat down a couple months ago and we developed a framework for talent management. This is on our website. There's about a 15 or 20-minute audio that will walk you through it. And I want to point out just one thing here. As we deliberately drew this in a way to highlight several things. The first is this strategy and planning process is absolutely critical. If you run around through your company and you say, okay, we're going to redo the performance management process and we're going to make it a 5-point scale, and you don't start from the business strategy, you're probably going to have a very, very tough time being successful. So you have to start there. The second thing I want to highlight is these are really the 4 critical processes. They relate to each other more or less the way they're arranged on this chart. Competency management and learning and development are really foundational to this. It turns out that those of you who are training professionals, and I assume that's who most of you are going to become very, very important because you play a role in every single one of these boxes. And that's the reason we drew it this way, is almost everything you do in every one of these boxes is somehow dependent on competency management and learning-related processes. So it's not like talent management is separate from training. Training and learning and development, or whatever you call it in your organization, is foundational and it's going to be very, very important. If I go back one more time to Raytheon, and I'm going to show you their roadmap at the end, they finally realized after a couple of years of struggling with this that, in fact, what their VP of HR said is, what we used to have is what we called the pinball model of talent management. The employees are basically like pinballs. They bounce around from job to job, wherever they want to go. We tell them to manage their own careers. How many of you have ever been told to manage your own career? They used to tell me that at IBM. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to manage my career. The company had, 300,000 employees. I didn't know what the career opportunities were. And the pinballs bounce around, and sometimes they go in the hole, and sometimes they go down the bottom of the pinball machine. And he said, we didn't care. We had enough engineers. Some of them left, some of them stayed. We didn't really notice. And he said, now we can't do that anymore. We have to create a deterministic career planning model in our company because we need to move these people into the jobs that we want them in. We need to develop them to become leaders, and we need to locate them and take advantage of the business opportunities we have. That's all about learning and development. That's all about training programs, competency management, career maps. I mean, it's all stuff that you guys know how to do. So in a sense, this is elevating learning and development one more time to maybe a more strategic level than ever before.